let's talk about Jesus. We good? We good? Perfect. All right. So, listen, the Last Supper, the last time Jesus hangs out with his disciples, we talk about it all the time. And we talk about it because it's really significant and because it makes sense for us as disciples of Jesus, as followers of Christ, to talk about the Last Supper because the Last Supper is this really unique moment where Jesus is about to die. Like, he knows he's going to the cross and he knows he's going to raise from the dead, but he also knows he's going to ascend to heaven, which means the ministry that he had on earth, he was passing off to the disciples, just like a baton. Like, I'm just like, what I was doing, now you guys are responsible to do. And that was a lot. I mean, he spent 3 years, preparing them for this. But that last night, he's kind of going over the high points, trying to remind them, like, hey, remember I told you this? Remember I told you this? Hey, remember that one time? Yeah, okay, that's going to be very important. Like, just bringing up all these memories. And as a part of that, I think one thing that we should always remember whenever we talk about the Last Supper, anytime we talk about like communion or anything like that, we should remember that an alarming amount of the Last Supper is Jesus telling his disciples how terrible everything is going to be. Like how, like they're going to be persecuted, they're going to be kicked out of the synagogue. Like people are like, one of the scariest sentences in the world is he says people are going to kill you and they're going to think they're serving God. Which is it's just such an incredibly difficult thing to wrap our heads around, that good people could do terrible things and think that God wants them to. And that's what Jesus was saying is, your friends, your family members, your countrymen, your the people that share your religious convictions, they are going to do these terrible things to you and think they're doing the right thing. And we see all that played out. So an alarming amount of the Last Supper is Jesus telling the disciples, it's going to get real bad. It's going to be really difficult. You're not going to like it. The same way that they hated me, they hate you, all of that. And so in the midst of that, there is a passage of scripture that Jesus shares with the disciples that is really kind of become a favorite to a lot of folks as we talk about the way that the world is, the way that being a Christian is, and just how life is. This is what Jesus tells the disciples in John chapter 14, this promise of a gift that he's giving them. In John 14, we read this. Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither let them be afraid." So Jesus says, I'm going to give you as a gift peace. And he says it's a gift that the world cannot give, that nobody in this world, no religious group, no king, no club, no family, no anything. No one else can give you this peace, but I'm giving you this peace. Now, I remember when I was younger and I read the Bible for the first time. This is one of those. I was big when I first read the Bible. Like, I was a big underliner. Like, I was kind of an over-underliner. I don't know if you guys ever see your grandpa's Bible and they make little notes. I was that guy back in the day who, my whole Bible was an underline, which really made it really ineffective because if everything's underlined, nothing's underlined, turns out. But anyway, that passage in John 14 was one of the first kind of underlined. I remember being 12 or 13 and reading this and being like, that is the coolest thing. And the reason is this. So much of the Bible demands explanation. How long do I spend talking to you guys about the back context of a passage? We just a couple weeks ago talked about, or maybe it was last week, we talked about that Christmas thing, a virgin will give birth, and there was a whole it was more than a page of my sermon. There's a whole background information about these kings and this war and these empires and these nations and what it all meant. A lot of times the Bible demands so much context and so much backstory, and by the time you get to the end, you're like, okay, well, that was cool. But it's just hard. This passage feels like one of those passages that is not that way. It's very straightforward. Jesus says, I'm giving you peace, nobody else can. Don't be afraid. Very simple. Giving you peace, nobody else can, don't be afraid. Giving you peace, nobody else can, don't be afraid. Perfect. It seems it feels like the sort of thing you can just make a note of and say, that's a really cool verse. Maybe when I'm discouraged or maybe when I'm afraid or maybe when I'm sad or down or whatever, I can read this and I can be reminded of, what Jesus has given me and I can feel that again. And it's one of those things that at first, at least, it seems like, okay, this is super easy to understand. And to a degree, that's true. But here's the thing. Being able to understand something and being able to feel something are two totally different things. And the problem with this verse is there are times when you read this verse and you're like, yeah, absolutely. I feel at peace in my heart, in my soul, in my mind. I feel at peace in my life. Like the whole point is not that like there's peace on earth. Like, he specifically says it's not. The world doesn't give it. But the idea is that like the whole world around us is crazy, but I am at peace myself. Right? Like you can't take my peace from me because it was given it by Christ, and no one is bigger than Jesus. Sometimes this passage really reflects how we feel. And sometimes this passage is ridiculous. Like it's absurd. Because sometimes the last thing you feel is peace. Sometimes it's like, man, where is that peace you promised? Like, hey, is it like maybe it's God's fault? Like maybe maybe got lost in the mail. I don't know. Like what? Like you get like this gift of peace. Maybe maybe something happened. Like maybe it's God, or maybe it's me. Right? Like maybe I'm the one that for whatever reason, something in me, something the way that, I'm wired, or something the way that I'm built, or something the way that I'm thinking, whatever it is. Sometimes you think about peace and you just don't have it. And so what we have in this passage is something that's very hopeful and very nice and very lovely. But it also is something that a lot of times is very impractical. It's incredibly impractical. Because as much as Jesus is saying, I'm giving you peace, we are not feeling that peace. We do not experience that peace. Jesus says, I'm giving it to you as a gift, but the problem with a gift is you have to be able to like receive it and unpack it and do stuff, right? Like sometimes gifts are just, like if you guys ever got married, you guys know that you get those gifts that you find in your garage 12 years later. And you're like, oh man, somebody did get me this automatic pizza cooker. I would have really liked that one time I needed to cook pizza automatically. But I didn't know it was here, so it was just sitting here. Like that's the way gifts work sometimes, and this feels like one of those gifts, right? That Jesus says, I'm giving you peace, but it's hard to receive it. So here's the question. Okay, what do we do with this? Like, how is it that we should understand that God gives us peace? And how is it that we should recognize that God gives us peace? And how is it that we can feel in any way somewhat at peace somehow? It's a good question, hoping to answer it, but we're going to go to a weird place. We're going to go to maybe a place you don't expect to go for to explain this. We're going to talk about a story that seemingly has absolutely not one single connection with this passage at all. Hopefully you'll see how it does connect, but at first it might not, and that is one of the oldest stories in the entire Bible, the story of Cain and Abel. So the story of Cain and Abel is literally one of the most ancient stories in all of the religious world. It is certainly one of the most ancient stories in the scriptures. It's like the 4th chapter of the Bible. It's literally the 2nd story of the Bible. Like you have maybe the 3rd. I guess you could have like the creation, then the fall, then this. You might call creation and fall together and then this. But it's like the 2nd or 3rd story of the entire Bible. It's a story of Adam and Eve's children born to them outside of the Garden of Eden, being Cain and Abel. So Cain and Abel are very much like their parents, except they don't have the bliss that their parents had. They do not live in a Garden of Eden. They do not live in anything like that. They live in a world after sin, after death, after a fall. They live in a world that's basically ours, right? The difference between paradise and this. They live in this. But they actually live really great lives. As the story goes, we're told that they're born and they both commit themselves to living an honorable, respectable, really and truly beautiful life. Okay? Cain is a farmer. He commits his life to working in the fields, to planting the seeds, to harvesting, to getting dirty in the mud. He knew the satisfaction of a long, hard day's work. He knew the satisfaction of, after a season, seeing the fruit of his labor. He just somebody who absolutely loved being in the world, being in the dirt, doing all the things, communing with God, communing with nature, all of that. A truly beautiful, wonderful life. And his brother had a very similar life, though it was a little bit different. His brother Abel was a shepherd. He basically all the same stuff, knew the satisfaction of a long day's work, knew all of that, knew what it was like to toil with blood, sweat, and tears, but he took care of the livestock of the family. He took care of the sheep and whatever animals they would have had. And so he knew all of that. He understood that, but also Abel was a protector. Abel was somebody who knew at the drop of a hat, just like that, he might have to fight, to protect, to defend, maybe even to die if need be, for the well-being not just of his animals, but of course of his family who relies on these animals. And so Cain and Abel have these incredible lives, these wonderful lives in this world where they both are happy. They're both, they live lives. They are at peace. They both have satisfaction. Everything's wonderful. And they know God. And so one day they decide, we are going to show our appreciation to God for the lives that we have. We're going to offer a sacrifice to God. Give God a gift back, recognizing that this world, this life, these jobs, this stuff we have, everything we have is a gift from God. We want to give something back to God to show that we truly love and appreciate him in return. And they both decided this was a really good idea. Abel, for his sake, as he looks at his sheep and the animals, and he says, look, I want to give something back to God, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give back the best animals that I have. I'm going to give them back to God to show him my appreciation. So he looked at all of the animals he had, and he found the firstborn animals, like really the special ones, like the ones you get really excited about. Like the first time you get it, your sheep have babies. I mean, that's just an amazing feeling, for a shepherd, because you're growing. By the time it's like the 7th or 8th, you're like, okay, yeah, I get it, childbirth, whatever. But the first ones where you were really excited, and he took of the firstborn animals, he took the ones that looked the healthiest, the ones that would grow into the best ones, and he took those and he sacrificed them to God. And yes, he killed them and all of that, and that's bad. Okay, whatever. Like, killing animals it's an old story. Okay, so let's move past the killing of the animals because it's icky for those of us who are city folk. Okay, I don't want to know where my hamburger comes from. I just want to eat it. Okay? And if you think I'm a hypocrite for that, fair. It's totally fair. I am totally fine living this life. No, not knowing who killed my animals, just enjoying how delicious they are. So he sacrifices the animals, the best that he has. He makes this sacrifice, and he gives it to God, and God tells him, like, well, that was awesome. Like, you didn't have to do that. Like, there's nothing in the story where, like, you're, like, ordered to do, like, but I appreciate it. Thank you for this gift. I approve of it. Everything's great. So there's Cain. Cain's like, yeah, I should do that too. Absolutely. Cain, like, we're not sure his motivations. I mean, that's kind of a theme in the story. But we're not totally sure his motivations. But Cain doesn't do the thing that Abel does. He doesn't get the best of his crops. At least intentionally. Like, he may have like stumbled across it. But the thing that Cain does is he just grabs some crops. And he's just like, yeah, these will do. And, a little less icky because, it's just plants. And so, he sacrifices them, he burns them and all that, and gives to God this gift of his harvest. Again, he's doing it for the same reason Abel's doing it. He's doing it theoretically with the same attitude Abel's doing it. But there's a problem. And God tells him, look, I didn't ask you to do that. I didn't order you to do this. But if you're going to give me, if you're going to try to show your appreciation, look what your brother did. That you just gave me, like, some stuff here. And you might think that sounds harsh, right? Like, we are people that, like, if your kid brings you the worst drawing in the world with crayons, you say, oh, what a lovely spaceship with a dinosaur on it. Let me put that on the fridge. right? Like, you don't say, like, well, that's terrible. Looks like you're not going to art school. Wad it up, throw it back. So it sounds weird that God tells Cain, like, I don't like your gift to me. It seems almost harsh. But God explains, he's like, look, I don't care. I didn't need this in the first place. But I'm telling you that you're kind of in danger here. Because the fact that you did what you did for the reason you did it the way that you did it, it kind of shows that you've got some things in your life that aren't great. The way he said it was, sin is crouching at the door. Right? Like, you might not see what's going on yet, but there are things that are going to hurt you and hurt other people. There are attitudes, there are actions, there's things within you that you don't even understand how they can hurt you, but I am trying to tell you they can, and I'm telling you that sacrifice you made is that's just a reflection of that. It's not that I really care that much about the sacrifice. It's that I care about the sin that caused the sacrifice to be wonky, right? Like, you should be careful. You should really, like, take this as a time for self-reflection to make sure that you are not hurting other people. And Cain, speaking to God, is like, yeah, okay, that's good advice. And then right afterwards, Cain went and killed his brother. So sometimes when people are supposed to have self-reflection, they don't. And that's what happened. Again, we don't know why Cain does it. Like, we don't know, like, if it's, like, jealousy. We don't know if it's just anger. We don't know if, like, he's just, like, crazy. Like, we have no idea why he does it. But he takes his brother out into a field and he kills him. And the thing about it is, so we always, like, it's very common in our society to say, like, well, Cain killed Abel with a rock. That's not in the Bible anywhere. And in the ancient world, they actually didn't think that he killed him with a rock. In the ancient world, there was this telling of the story, and they said, well, Cain's a farmer, so he killed him with a farming implement. He disemboweled him, which is also icky. Well, we're talking about icky things. And they saw it as this grisly thing. And you might think, well, that's needlessly graphic, right? Like, sometimes stories don't need, but see, it's not needlessly graphic because it shows a couple of things. If you're going to kill somebody, I've watched a lot of murder shows, okay? And I've got some advice for you if you need to kill somebody. Write this down. If you're going to try to get away with murder, don't leave the bowels of your victim anywhere. That has DNA on it. Probably yours. Like, the point is, when God confronts Cain with this, he's like, the blood of your brother is screaming at me from the ground, which is to say, like, there's all this blood here. Cain is not trying to get away with this. That's the point. Cain is so shameless. He's so lost. He's so confused. He kills his brother in a bloody way. However it was done, it was a bloody way, and doesn't even try to cover it up. He makes no attempt to hide it. Sometimes I think, God comes to Cain, and one of the most famous parts of the story that is coming is God says, hey, Cain, where's your brother? And Cain says, well, who am I, my brother's keeper? That's not telling God, I don't know. That's telling God, I don't care. Those are two very different things. Cain is not trying to hide his sin. He is not trying to hide the fact that he killed his brother. He's telling God, I don't care if my brother's dead or alive. I don't care if you know what I did or not. Cain is so rotten to his core that not only does he slaughter his brother for absolutely no reason, but he doesn't even hide it. So God punishes Cain. And he does so in a way that's kind of interesting, right? Like, later on, we're going to have the law of Moses, and it's an eye for an eye, and if you kill somebody, you die. But God doesn't do that in this case. It's interesting. God tells Cain, look, you just can't be here anymore. What you've done, like, I don't want to kill you too. That's just two dead children of Adam and Eve. I don't want that. So what I'm telling you is you're banished. You can't farm anymore. I'm going to make sure, because I'm the guy who controls this. I'm going to make sure that you never plant another crop that produces fruit. You're done. This thing you love, this thing that you are passionate about, this thing you live every day for, I'm taking it. You can't do that. You've got to start over. You have to change because the person you've been cannot keep going. So you're not going to be able to farm, and you're not going to be able to live here anymore. You're going to have to wander the earth and just find something. You're going to be homeless. You're going to drift. If you find a place, fine, whatever, but you're going to have to start all the way over. Cain doesn't like this plan. In fact, Cain says, I wish you'd just kill me. This is way worse than death. Living without the things I love? Living away from home? He says, look, if I go out there, I'm going to have like a target on me. I'm going to be hunted. Everybody's going to know what I did, and they're all going to come for me. And God, of course, doesn't say, well, yeah. Instead, God says, okay, you're right. And so God marks him in some way. He says, I'm going to put this mark on you. Everybody's going to see you and say, well, let's stay away from that guy. And if anybody does kill you, I'll just punish them sevenfold, and I'll make sure everybody knows that. And so we'll just do that, and that way you'll always be safe. Miserable, but safe. Well, miserable till you figure, your stuff out, right? But you'll always be alive. And that's the end of the story, basically. Cain goes out. He's got a wife. He's got a kid. They start a city. It's a whole thing. Like Cain has like an ending. We don't ever really learn. Like, does he ever actually repent? We don't learn any of that. Okay, so you probably at this point really good and ready to figure out why I brought that up. Like, why talk about John 14, and then also talk about this. Well, there's two things. There's two things in this story that I feel like we need to remember and understand that have direct application for us. So let's start here. This story makes absolutely no sense from the start. None. Like there's something about this story that we fail to see how crazy it is. When you get a chance sometime, go back and read Genesis chapter 3. And then read Genesis chapter 4. And ask yourself the question, what is different in the relationship and the interactions between God and Adam and Eve and God and Cain and Abel? And the alarming fact you're going to find is there is not a difference at all. And that's crazy. In the Garden of Eden, God is out here talking to Adam and Eve all the time. Like they're walking in the cool of the day. They have all the stuff, right? Like that's great. In Genesis chapter 4, in the story of Cain and Abel, they are casually talking back and forth to God. They have a very good relationship with God. They are not like told directly to have this relationship. They just do. It's just part of their existence. They have an incredibly close relationship to God outside of the Garden of Eden, exactly the way Adam and Eve had a relationship with God inside the Garden of Eden. Now understand, the story of Adam and Eve ends with them being banished from paradise, right? They sinned, they didn't listen to God, there's consequence for sin, they introduced death and destruction and all the things, they do all of that, that's how that story ends. And we lose paradise. But while we might have lost paradise, we don't lose God. It's essentially like this. Adam and Eve sin, and in doing so, they walk away from God. And God says, okay, I'll follow you. Like, I'm not leaving. I'm not going anywhere. I'm just right here. The fact of the matter is, if you read like the punishment of Adam and Eve, you would expect to have some, difficult relationship between God and Adam and Eve's children. You would expect there to be some friction, some division. You would expect there to be nothing but agony and pain and death, and that is in no way how the story goes. In not any way is the story like that. Abel and Cain are given very good lives. Abel and Cain have a beautiful relationship with God. Cain and Abel, I got to switch that now because I just called him Claim. Cain and Abel have this incredible closeness. They have a relationship where God is gifting them all sorts of things, and they, in return, out of appreciation, are gifting things back. They know God. And quite frankly, that's not the way that should be. That's not the way, at least, it could be. This is what we read in the New Testament book from Paul to the ancient church at Rome. This is what he says about existence. He says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord." We've heard that in the idea of salvation over and 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 over, and that's good. Let's always do that. Let's think about this from the perspective of the story of Cain and Abel. What mankind, what Adam and Eve had earned, the wages, right? Like what they had done in order to get something, the consequences of their situation was death. And yet their children are given life. Why? Because God is good, and God is loving, and God is kind, and God gives to us the gift of life, whether or not we possibly could ever deserve it. And oh, by the way, we don't. Even apart from salvation, the gift of God is that we get to live and exist. Cain and Abel, absolutely, they're the first people, they're Adam and Eve's children. If anybody would be like, well, we're not them, it would be them. But God is unchanged by the sin of Adam and Eve. Because God is unchanged by anybody's sin, including mine and yours. So that's the first thing. The second thing, this is the part that for years I've thought about this part of the story, okay? It's the reaction of Cain and God's reaction to Cain. So Cain kills Abel, and God says, I'm going to make you a homeless wanderer, and you have to start over, and you can't farm, and you can't do all that stuff. You have to completely start your life over. You got to completely change. I'm forcing you to change. When Cain says, that's not fair, please just kill me, I don't think that's right, that's too much, we read that, and I think our first inclination, our gut reaction is, man, what a whiner. You just killed your brother, and you're complaining about the punishment? Ask Abel how he feels about the situation. Ask Abel if it was fair for him to get killed by his brother for absolutely reasons that we can't figure out. And you think, well, what a whiner Cain is. But here's the funny thing about this. Here's the part that keeps me up at night. God, listening to Cain, Cain says, hey, look, this is what it is. God doesn't say, Cain, you whiner. Cain, what about your brother? Cain, ask your brother how he feels about it. God says, no, you're right. I should probably protect you if you're going to start over. God agrees with Cain that the initial punishment is a little bit unfair and a little too much. Now, Cain, hard-hitting analysis here. Cain is not a good person. I know, blowing your mind. Just keep that in mind. Cain is not a good person. And yet Cain is terrified of other people. He's terrified. He thinks it's unfair to be at the mercy of other people. He thinks it's cruel, it's too much to be at the mercy of other people. That can only be a couple things. That can really only lead us to one conclusion. And that conclusion is this. Cain is not a good guy, but maybe Cain is normal. Maybe Cain is just like everybody else. Maybe everybody else is just like Cain. Maybe when we read the story, we're not supposed to read Cain, the supervillain, kills his brother because he doesn't care and leaves his blood everywhere because he's not bothered to even try to hide it because he's so wicked and sinful. Maybe we're supposed to read this story as this is what a normal person does when they do normal people stuff. Maybe the reason that you cannot look at a single period of human history and not see horrific atrocities, terrible acts of violence, war, abuse, powers that go crazy. Maybe the reason that like history plays out like that is because Cain is normal. And Cain had every right to be afraid of everybody else because that's how people are. And maybe we're supposed to be reading this story not as a story of two brothers, one good and one bad. But maybe we're supposed to be reading this story in a way of saying, well, those are two eventualities and two possibilities that are within me. Like maybe we're supposed to look at the story and say, like, I could be Abel if I am faithful, or I could give into the unfaithful part of myself, and when I do that, I'll become Cain. Maybe the lesson here is not this bad person. Maybe this lesson is the bad that's within all of us. And that's why it's normal. And that's why he's scared. And that's why God says, actually, you're right. Let me go ahead and mark it, and I'll give this threat to everybody else because the only way you're going to survive is if I do this, right? And maybe there's a lesson in there that we've missed sometimes because we're seeing really fun things. So, like, here's a really fun verse that's got a really negative downside to it that we rarely talk about. It's, again, Paul. It's a letter to the church at Ephesus. I promise you've heard this before. This is what he says. Paul says, God saved you by his grace when you believed. You can't take credit for this. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we have done, so none of us can boast about it. We see that, and we're like, what a great gift from God. That's lovely. But there's that part of, like, well, you couldn't do it. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible that God makes humans and he's like, well, let's see what they can do. And then we prove what we're going to do. And he's like, well, that didn't work out. I can now save them or I can, not, but they're not going to make it on their own. The fact is, if it's up to us to be good people, it's never going to happen. We got too much of Cain inside of us. We got too much jealousy. We got too much envy. We got too much greed. We've got too much laziness. We've got too much let that guy deal with it. I don't want to inside of us. We got too much like, well, why can't it be about me today? We got all of that. I think the story of Cain and Abel is trying to convey to us these deep truths of God and people. And those truths basically boil down to this. Number one, we don't really deserve life, but God gives it to us anyway. And it is such a gift. It is so one-sided that none of us, no one, not even your beloved grandmother that you know was just the best, no one can do this on their own. We all need help. We all need grace. Now, you're probably wondering, still, what does it have to do with John 14? Well, let me tell you. I think sometimes we get things a little twisted when we think, okay, Jesus says, I'm giving you this gift, it's peace. Okay. What if instead of thinking about peace as like an object, a thing we feel all the time, what if we think about peace instead as that which Christ gives? Whatever Christ is giving to us is peace. Whatever it is. Which is to say this, we are not always going to feel the peace of God. But wherever we find peace, we are experiencing God. You see, I think it's just like that Ephesians 2 passage where we focus on, I'm going to give you this gift. But what Jesus is actually saying is, I'm going to give you the thing the world can't give you. He's trying to describe to his disciples that, look, you guys are going to suffer. You guys are going to be persecuted. You guys are going to be kicked out. People are going to kill you and think they're serving God. They cannot give you peace. This is the same world of Cain and Abel. Brothers kill each other, and Cain is normal. That's the world we live in. I'm sorry. I know it's not very happy and peppy, but it's the truth. And Jesus did not want his disciples to be disappointed by their expectations of a world that was something other than what it is. There is no peace in this world. 2,000 years ago, there was not peace in this world. Today, there is not peace in this world. Everything in between, no peace in this world. But where God gives us gifts, be it as simple as to Cain, hey, I'll make sure nobody kills you. Or as large as you have this life, Cain and Abel. You have this, you get to do what you love and are passionate about, and I know you, and we have a relationship together, and you can hear from me, and I hear from you, and that, as big as that. All of those gifts are God offering us a peace that is not in this world. Because the fact of the matter is, we will always be disappointed if we are looking for peace here and now. The first story outside the garden is a brother killing his brother, and he's normal. We are always going to be disappointed if we are looking for anything in this world, in this life, that brings peace. But God gives us the gift and the gifts of peace, be it salvation, be it just the fact that we're breathing, the relationships we have, family, friends, the things we're passionate about. All of these things are God giving us his peace in the form of various, variety of ways that he gives us gifts. And that's, of course, why we're talking about this. This morning, we're in our 4th week of our series called God's Love Language. We've been talking about how God communicates to people different ways, right? People experience love different ways. People experience God different ways, therefore, because God is love. And one of the ways that people experience love a lot is giving and receiving gifts. It's one of the 5 love languages. And so as we talk about the way that God connects with people who feel love that way, what we see in the scriptures is over and 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 over, despite our inability to deserve or earn anything from God, God gives it to us anyway. God gives us his love, his mercy, his grace, his compassion. God gives us salvation. God gives us his life. God gives us everything we have. And wherever we find peace, whenever we find peace, we are finding God, because that is always a gift that only God can give. So we're in our 4th week of this series, and our 4th lesson is this. We will never find peace in this world, but we find it in all of the gifts of life and salvation that God gives us. So one more time, we will never find peace in this world, but we find it in all of the gifts of life and salvation that God gives us. We are going to offer an invitation this morning, which is just a fancy way of saying we're going to sing a song that we already sang. And if you have a thing you want to do, like you want to become a Christian, you want to get baptized, we should talk about that. If you want to join the church, we should talk about that. Just let me know and do that. So we're going to sing this song. You're going to do all that. It's going to be super great. Let's stand.